A lonely rancher always dreamed of a gentle bride, a soft voice, a warm smile, someone to turn his empty cabin into a home. Jonas Hawley was not the kind of man people noticed. Slim, quiet, a figure you could miss even if he stood right in front of you. Other cowboys in town filled the saloon with laughter and noise. Jonas filled his nights with silence. Silence and the sound of the wind slipping under the cabin door. That silence grew heavier every year. It pressed down on him when he ate alone. It pressed harder when he walked back from church and saw other men's wives waiting on the steps, their children running to greet them. Jonas had no one, and in that wide, empty land, no one felt like a curse. So he did what he once swore he'd never do. He wrote for a bride. By lamplight, he bent over paper, scratching words he hardly knew how to shape. His hand shook, his heart ached. He told the truth. His ranch was small, but his heart was honest. He didn't promise riches, only a roof, a place to belong, and the steady work of the land. He asked for someone gentle, someone who could bring warmth into a house that had only ever known cold. Then he waited. Days turned into weeks. Every hoofbeat on the road made him glance up. Every envelope delivered in town made his chest tighten. Until at last a letter came. Her name was Clara Whitfield. Jonas read her name again and again, as though it was already a prayer. Her handwriting swept across the page like flowing ribbon. She wrote that she was strong, that she had worked through hardship, that her back and her hands were used to carrying more than her share. She admitted she was taller than most women, that her shoulders had been called broad, that her figure often startled strangers. But between her words of strength, Jonas saw something else. He saw modesty. He saw humility. He saw the woman he wanted to see. In his mind, Clara became a gentle soul in a calico dress, soft hands kneading bread, hair pinned neatly in the evening light, a quiet laugh that would echo in his cabin and drive the loneliness out. Every letter fed his dream. Clara wrote of endurance. He read it as patience. She wrote of belonging. He read it as tenderness. She wrote of faith. He read it as love. And each time a letter came, Jonas pressed it to his chest before opening it, as though the warmth of her touch might still cling to the paper. At night, he whispered her words into the silence. Sometimes, when the moon was high, he set a plate on the table across from him, just to imagine her there. The dream grew stronger, softer, sweeter. By the time spring rolled in, Jonas had convinced himself that his prayers had been answered, that Clara was the gentle bride he had begged God for. So when word came that her stagecoach was finally arriving, Jonas hardly slept the night before. He rose early, washed the dust from his face, and brushed his one good vest until it looked almost new. Then he walked into town, his hands sweating inside his gloves, his chest tight as a drawn rope. The news had traveled fast. The whole street seemed to know. Men leaned on hitching posts, waiting for a show. Women stood with baskets of laundry half forgotten, whispering behind their hands. Children sat on fences, eyes wide, eager to see the loner rancher meet his bride. Jonas tried to ignore them. He stood in the dust, hat twisting in his hands, eyes fixed on the horizon. A cloud of dirt rose in the distance. The stagecoach. Closer. Louder. The rumble of wheels. The snort of horses. The creak of iron. Jonas's breath caught. Every dream he'd nursed came rushing back. Her letters. Her words. Her promise of belonging. He told himself again and again, she will be gentle. She will be soft. She will be the answer to my prayers. The stagecoach pulled up. The horses stamped, foam at their mouths, dust swirling around their hooves. The driver swung down, opened the door. Jonas's world held its breath. The whole town leaned forward. And then, A figure filled the doorway. Broad shoulders. A frame taller than any woman in town. Hands gripping the edge as though the wood itself feared to break beneath her strength. Jonas's heart stumbled. This was Clara Whitfield. And she was nothing like the dream. The first thing Jonas saw were her shoulders, broad as a man's, filling the doorway. Then her height. When she stepped down, the ground seemed to shrink beneath her. She stood taller than most men gathered there, and twice as solid. Clara Whitfield. The letters had not lied. She was strong. She was built for labor. She was everything she had written. But Jonas's mind, starved for softness, had refused to believe it. And now, standing before him, was not the gentle shadow of his dreams, but a flesh and blood woman who looked as though she could tame a wild horse with her bare hands. The crowd noticed before Jonas could speak. Whispers turned sharp. Gasps turned to laughter. Children pointed, tugging on their mothers' sleeves. Men smirked behind calloused hands. "That's his bride?" Someone muttered. "She's bigger than him." Another chuckled. The sound cut through Jonas like a blade. His ears burned hot, his chest felt hollow. Clara, meanwhile, did not flinch. Her chin stayed high, her eyes steady. She wore a plain traveling dress, its sleeves pulled tight across her arms. The sun caught strands of her hair, swept back from her face, and her gaze swept the crowd like a soldier surveying a field. When her eyes landed on Jonas, she did not hesitate. She walked forward, her steps firm, the earth crunching beneath her boots. Jonas felt smaller with every stride she took. He had always been lean, narrow-shouldered, and now the difference stood plain for all to see. The crowd saw it too. A rancher, thin as a fence post, and a bride, towering, strong, almost defiant. Laughter rippled like fire through dry grass. Jonas wanted to shrink into the dirt. He wanted to vanish. He had dreamed of a woman who would make him feel bigger, stronger. Instead, she made him look smaller than ever. Clara stopped in front of him. "Mr. Hawley," she said, her voice clear, carrying over the noise of the street. There was no tremor, no apology. Just steady words, spoken as if she had already decided she belonged here. Jonas swallowed hard. His mouth had gone dry. He wanted to greet her with warmth, but all he could manage was a nod, his tongue heavy as stone. Behind them, the laughter grew sharper. He ordered a wife and got a ranch hand instead. One man called out. The crowd roared. Jonas's stomach turned. He wanted to defend her, but the words caught in his throat. Clara did not so much as glance at them. She stood taller, straighter, as though she had spent her whole life walking through rooms filled with whispers. "Your letters were kind," she said softly, meant only for him. "I hope I may live up to them." Her words struck him like a hammer and a balm all at once. Because Jonas knew the truth, he had not written of strength. He had not written of labor. He had written of gentleness, of laughter, of warmth. He had built a dream she never promised. And now he stood facing the reality of her. The crowd expected him to flinch, to turn away, to run. Instead, Jonas lifted his hat, his hand trembling. "Clara," he said, his voice low, almost breaking. "Welcome." The laughter faltered, just for a moment. Clara's eyes softened, the first flicker of warmth breaking through her steel. The stagecoach driver tipped his hat, muttered something about the bags, and left them standing in the dust while the town gawked. Jonas could feel the eyes burning holes in his back. Every step he took beside Clara felt heavy, as though the whole town was measuring the size of his boots against hers. But Clara did not slow. She carried her own trunk, muscles shifting beneath her sleeves, while Jonas stumbled to keep pace. To the crowd, it was a spectacle. To Jonas, it was a storm inside his chest. The bride he had prayed for was not the bride he received. And yet, as they walked away from the jeers and the whispers, Jonas caught the sound of her voice again, low, steady, certain. "Don't trouble yourself about them," Clara said. "I've heard worse." Jonas turned to look at her, really look at her. For the first time, he saw not just her size, not just her strength, but the unshakable fire in her eyes. And though the dream in his heart had shattered, something else began to stir. Something that made him wonder if God's answer to prayer didn't always come in the shape a man expected. The stagecoach dust had barely settled when Jonas and Clara reached the ranch. The walk back had been quiet, almost unbearable. Jonas, with his head low, clutching his hat. Clara, with her trunk balanced on her hip as though it weighed nothing at all. Every step reminded Jonas of the whispers in town. Every step reminded Clara of a lifetime of stairs. When the cabin came into view, Jonas felt no relief. The little home that had once seemed enough now looked smaller than ever. The porch sagged, the windows clouded with dust. It had always been empty, but now standing beside Clara it felt almost foolish. He pushed the door open. The silence of the cabin swallowed them whole. Jonas gestured weakly. "It ain't much." Clara stepped inside, her eyes scanning the rough-hewn walls, the single chair, the table with its scarred surface. She nodded once. "It'll do?" That was all. The silence between them grew heavier than the desert night. Jonas busied himself with chores, though his hands fumbled more than usual. He stacked tools, fetched water, checked fence lines. Anything to keep from looking at her too long. Because every time he did, the picture he had built of a small, gentle wife crumbled again. Clara did not hide her strength. She split logs with a single swing of the axe, her arms steady and sure. She carried 2 full buckets of water as if they were no heavier than pails of milk. She moved with the confidence of someone who had done such work all her life. And Jonas didn't know what to do with it. He found himself pulling back, retreating into silence. He ate quickly, eyes downcast. He muttered answers instead of speaking full sentences. He slept restless, hearing the creak of floorboards, as Clara moved about the cabin long after he had laid down. Clara noticed. Of course she noticed. It was a familiar ache. She had felt it in other places, from other people. That look in their eyes measuring her, finding her too much woman, not enough lady. She had seen men's pride shrivel beside her. She had seen women whisper, afraid of her size. She had hoped Jonas might be different. His letters had been gentle kind. But now, in the flicker of lamplight, she saw the disappointment on his face. Still, there were moments. Jonas caught her humming softly one evening, a tune from some old hymn, as she kneaded dough with her strong hands. The sound startled him. It was the first music he had ever heard in the cabin. For a moment, he forgot the ache in his chest and just listened. And Clara revealed flashes of something else. One afternoon, she paused at the corral. A young colt, skittish and wild-eyed, stamped nervously against the fence. Jonas had never been able to get close without it bolting. But Clara crouched, stretching out her hand, her voice low and steady. The colt trembled, ears flicking. And then it stepped forward. Her big hand brushed against its muzzle, and the animal calmed beneath her touch. Jonas, watching from the porch, felt something shift inside him. Her strength was plain. But here was gentleness too, hidden under all that power. Still, he could not bring himself to say it. Night stretched long. The fire cracked. Shadows moved across the walls. Jonas sat in silence, staring into the flames. Clara sewed in the corner, her shoulders hunched, her jaw tight, pretending not to feel the distance. 2 people under the same roof. 2 hearts weighed down by the same loneliness. And yet, they stood miles apart. Jonas wrestled with disappointment. He had asked for a gentle bride, and he believed God had sent him the opposite. He told himself it was a mistake, a cruel twist of fate. And still, when he saw her humming at the table, or calming the colt with her hand, something inside him stirred. Clara wrestled with the ache of being judged again for what she could not change. She carried his silence like another burden on her back. And still, when she caught him sneaking glances, his thin face softened with confusion rather than scorn. Something inside her hoped. A home of uneasy silence. Two souls circling each other like strangers. And yet, under the weight of disappointment, seeds were quietly being sown. Neither of them knew it. Neither of them would have admitted it. But out there in the dust and the quiet, life was preparing a storm that would shake both their hearts. The days at the ranch passed heavy, like clouds that never broke into rain. Jonas worked the land, his back bent, his mind restless. Clara carried water, mended fences, tended the hearth, her silence speaking louder than words ever could. Neither of them dared to say what weighed in their chests. Jonas had dreamed of a delicate hand in his own, a soft laugh filling the kitchen, a gentle touch after long days in the field. What he had instead was Clara, broad-shouldered, taller than him by a head, a woman who could sling a hay bale as though it were no more than a sack of flour. And Clara, she had long since stopped believing in dreams. Too many doors had shut in her face. Too many men had sneered at her size. Too many women had whispered that she belonged with the ranch hands, not the parlor. Yet here she was again, feeling the sting of disappointment, though she tried to hide it behind hard work and steady hands. Still, there were small cracks in the wall they built between them. Jonas had once walked past the kitchen and paused. Clara was humming, low and sweet, while kneading dough. Her large hands, the same hands that could wrestle a gate back into place, moved with surprising gentleness over the flour. For a moment, Jonas saw not the towering figure that unsettled him, but a woman simply making bread, carrying softness where no one expected it. And Clara, she had noticed the way Jonas treated his horses. He was lean and wiry, but his touch with the colts was steady, patient. He never raised his voice, never raised his hand. There was kindness there, though buried under silence and his own disappointment. But neither spoke. And silence has a way of growing heavier the longer it lingers. It all came undone on an afternoon when the sun blazed white-hot, and the air shimmered with heat. Jonas had been working with a young stallion, wild-blooded and fire-eyed, a beast he'd hoped to break and add to his herd. The horse had fought him for weeks, snapping reins, rearing high, kicking at the fence boards. That day, something snapped. With a crack of splintered wood, the stallion tore free from the corral. He thundered across the open pen, eyes rolling, hooves lashing dust into the sky. "Jonas, he's loose!" A ranch hand shouted. Men scrambled, some grabbing ropes, others scattering back in fear. The stallion screamed, a wild, piercing sound, and charged toward the open gate that led straight to the town road. If he got loose there, he could kill someone. Jonas froze. His hands trembled on the rope he held, his body caught between fear and duty. He had trained horses his whole life, but this one was different, too strong, too wild, too fast. His feet felt like they were sunk in the earth itself. And then Clara moved. She stepped forward, tall and unyielding, her shadow stretching across the dust. Her boots struck the ground in firm, fearless strides. The stallion reared, dust exploding around him, hooves slicing the air. Men shouted warnings. "Stay back, Clara. You'll be killed." But she did not pause. Her voice, when it came, was low and steady. Not loud, not sharp, but firm, like water-cutting stone. "Easy now," she whispered. The stallion's ears flicked toward her, even as he snorted and stamped. Clara reached out, her big hands spread, her body unmoving even as the animal's hot breath blew dust into her face. She didn't flinch, didn't cower. She had been stared at her whole life, judged and measured. This was no different. She knew what it meant to stand her ground when the world wanted her to shrink. The horse lunged and gasps tore through the crowd, but Clara's grip was quick, one hand on the reins, the other braced firm against the horse's neck. Muscles in her arms strained, tendons tight as ropes, but she held fast. Dust swirled. Hooves struck. The stallion bucked and twisted, but Clara did not let go. "Easy, boy," she breathed, her voice still soft, steady as a river. Her hands stroked the horse's quivering neck, fingers running down its trembling muscles. The beast's wild eyes darted, then blinked again. Slowly, impossibly, it stilled. The pen grew quiet. All around, men who had mocked her, who had whispered that Jonas had been cheated of a real wife, now stood slack-jawed in awe. She's got him," one muttered. "Never seen the like," said another. And Jonas stood frozen, his chest tight, his breath caught. He had never seen Clara look so alive. Dust clung to her hair, her face was streaked with sweat, her dress torn at the hem. But her eyes shone fierce, bright, unafraid. In that moment, Jonas did not see the woman who towered over him. He did not see the disappointment of his dreams undone. He saw strength paired with gentleness. He saw someone who could do what no one else dared. He saw something rare. The stallion's sides heaved as it finally lowered its head into Clara's hands. She stroked it, whispering quiet words only the horse seemed to hear. Around them, silence reigned, not from fear now, but reverence. And when Clara finally led the horse back into the corral, the town's whispers had changed. No longer did they murmur about her size, her strength, her mannish build. Now, they spoke of the woman who tamed the wild stallion with her bare hands. Jonas's heart pounded, and for the first time since she had stepped off at Stagecoach, he looked at Clara not as a mistake, not as a burden, not as a reminder of a dream lost, but as something he had never known he needed. Something fierce. Something true. And that night, as the desert stars wheeled overhead, Jonas lay awake long after the ranch had gone quiet. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Clara in the dust, standing unflinching before the wild. And for the first time in a long, lonely life, he wondered if God had not cheated him after all. That evening, Clara walked back to the ranch with the dust of the day still clinging to her dress. Her boots were scuffed, her hair wild from the wind, and her arms bore the faint marks of the stallion's fight. But there was something in the way she moved, not tired, not burdened, but steady, certain. Jonas watched her from the porch. He had seen her stand unflinching before a wild beast, seen her gentleness calm what no rope or spur could subdue. And now, as she crossed the yard toward him, he saw her differently than he ever had before. He rose slowly, as though afraid the moment might shatter if he moved too fast. "I thought I wanted someone small," Jonas said, his voice low, rough as gravel. "Someone quiet. Someone soft. But maybe," he swallowed, his eyes locked on hers, "maybe what I needed was someone strong enough to walk beside me." The words hung in the air, simple yet heavier than any silence between them. Clara's breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not in all her years of being pointed at, measured, dismissed. She had been called many things, too tall, too strong, too much, but never exactly enough. Her eyes glistened, though she kept her voice steady. "Strength doesn't mean I don't long to be cherished, Jonas." For the first time, she let him see her softness, not in shrinking, not in apology, but in honesty. Jonas stepped down from the porch, closing the distance that had yawned between them for weeks. The dying sun painted them in gold, stretching their shadows long across the earth. He stopped just before her, close enough to see the dust on her lashes, the line of weariness in her face, the unspoken hope in her eyes. "I see you now, Clara," he said. "Not what I thought you should be." Not what others say you are. Just you. And it? It feels like coming home. Her lips trembled, and for a heartbeat she looked away, afraid to believe. But Jonas reached for her hand, large, calloused, scarred from years of work, and instead of shrinking from its size, he folded it into his own. His lean fingers disappeared in her palm, but his grip was firm, certain. The touch broke something inside her, something she had held back for years. All her life, Clara had been told she was built for work, not for love. Men admired her strength when it suited them, but turned away when she dared to hope for tenderness. And yet here was Jonas, a man who had once longed for the delicate, the dainty, looking at her as though she was the very thing he'd been waiting for all along. She blinked back tears, then managed to whisper, "You don't know how long I've prayed to hear words like that." Jonas's jaw tightened, his eyes glimmering in the twilight. "And you don't know how long? I've prayed for someone to prove me wrong about what I thought I needed." They stood like that in the quiet until the first stars appeared. The air smelled of dust and horses, of wood smoke from the hearth, of earth cooling after the heat of day. The days that followed carried whispers through town. Folks couldn't stop talking about the way Clara had tamed the wild stallion, about the way Jonas had stood by her side after. Some still muttered their old judgments. She's too much woman, not enough lady, but the tone had changed. Curiosity lingered where cruelty once had. At the general store, women who once turned away found themselves watching Clara with new eyes. Some with envy, some with awe. And Jonas, the loner rancher who had spent years in silence, now walked into town with Clara beside him, no longer hunched beneath the weight of what folks might say. When a man chuckled and muttered, "Never thought Jonas would end up with a giant," Jonas turned, his voice sharp but calm. "Better a giant with a heart than a small man with none." The words spread faster than prairie fire, and soon enough, the laughter that had once followed Clara turned into something else, respect. Back at the ranch, life began to change. Jonas still worked the fields, but now Clara worked beside him, not in silence, but with easy conversation. He'd find her humming while she mended fences, her voice carrying across the wide pasture like a lullaby to the land itself. And Clara discovered something too. Beneath Jonas's lean frame and quiet ways, there was a gentleness she had never known. He'd bring her wildflowers tucked behind his back. He'd mend the strap on her work glove without being asked. At night, when the wind howled across the plains, he'd sit close, letting her strength shield him as much as his presence steadied her. For the first time in her life, Clara didn't feel like she had to be less to be loved. And for the first time, Jonas didn't feel like he had to carry the ranch alone. One evening, weeks after the stallion had been tamed, Jonas stood in the corral as the horse grazed quietly. Clara joined him, her shadow long against the fence. "Funny, isn't it?" Jonas said, his voice soft. "How sometimes the wildest things just need someone who understands." Clara rested her hand on the stallion's neck, the same way she had the day she calmed him. Her eyes flicked to Jonas, and in the fading light, she smiled. "Maybe that's all any of us need." Jonas reached for her then, not with hesitation, but with certainty. And when he drew her close, Clara leaned into him, not fearing she would crush him, not fearing she would be too much. Because for once, she wasn't. She was exactly enough. The town may gossip still. The whispers may never die completely. But on that ranch, where silence once hung heavy as the desert night, there was laughter now. There was the warmth of two voices filling empty rooms, of two hands, one lean and weathered, one large and strong, working side by side. The loner rancher had dreamed of a gentle bride. What he found instead was a woman the world had called too much. And in her, he discovered a different kind of gentle. Not fragile, not delicate, but strong enough to carry him when he faltered, tender enough to remind him he didn't have to carry life alone. And for Jonas and Clara, that was more than enough. The ranch no longer stood as a place of solitude. It was a home, and two lonely souls, long misunderstood, had finally found where they belonged. And that was the story of Jonas and Clara, a loner rancher who dreamed of a gentle wife, and a woman the world said was too much, yet turned out to be exactly what he needed. What do you think? Could you imagine life out on the frontier with someone like Clara? Tell me in the comments below. I read every one of them. Don't forget to hit subscribe if you want more Wild West stories like this, and tap the bell so you don't miss the next one. And let me know, where in the world are you listening tonight?